Imagine you're standing in a store holding a $20 candle. You know you don't need it, but somehow it slips into your cart anyway, almost like your hands made the decision before your brain did. But that same brain freezes when you're about to spend $200 on something meaningful like fixing your brakes, investing, or upgrading a tool that would actually improve your life. It's strange how we hesitate with the big things but casually drain our money on the small ones. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your mind plays this trick and how to break the cycle for good. My name is Tony, and I spend way too much time thinking about how money, psychology, and emotion all collide, and how understanding that collision can change your life. If you're tired of vague financial advice and ready to see things differently, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button if this video opens your eyes. Now, here's something that will blow your mind. It's funny how a spending habit can sneak up on you without announcing itself. You're standing in line, holding something small, a snack, a candle, a novelty keychain you'll forget about tomorrow and you don't think twice. It feels like nothing, like air, like a decision that evaporates as soon as you make it. And yet, when you're faced with spending $200 on something genuinely meaningful, something that would actually improve your life, your whole mind stiffens. It's almost as if your brain whispers, "Whoa, slow down. This could be dangerous." That's where this chapter begins. Because the truth is, overspending $20 at a time isn't really about the $20. It's about the emotional logic your brain uses, logic that rarely makes sense in the modern world, but made perfect sense thousands of years ago. Here's the thing. Small purchases don't trigger your internal alarm system. They're too tiny, too harmless. Your brain treats them like picking berries off a bush, quick, low risk, low effort decisions. Something ancient in you believes, it's fine, this won't hurt us. Think about that for a second. The emotional cost of a small purchase is almost zero. There's no perceived threat, no long-term commitment, no identity shift. But a $200 decision, that's where the story changes. A bigger purchase makes your brain pause, not because of the money, but because of what the money means. Larger purchases signal responsibility, permanency, and the possibility of regret. They demand clarity, and clarity demands energy. So, you avoid it. You procrastinate the meaningful purchase. You walk away from the thing that would genuinely help your life, the class, the repair, the upgrade, the investment, but you allow small leaks in your spending to flow freely, and it's not your fault. Researchers call this mental accounting, where the brain categorizes small money differently than large money, even if the long-term total is the same. In one study, people were 70% more willing to overspend on multiple small purchases than make one large strategic choice, even when both options cost the same amount over time. It's not rational, but it's deeply human. Here's the metaphor I want you to imagine. Picture your financial life as a bucket. Big purchases feel like drilling one obvious hole in the side, something you can see, measure, and patch if needed. But small purchases, those are like dozens of tiny pinholes. You don't see the water leaking until the bucket is half empty. And still, your brain treats those big patchable holes as dangerous, while the pinholes feel safe. This is the strange logic of small purchases. We fear what we can see clearly, and we ignore what feels too small to matter. But here's the hopeful part. You're not broken for thinking this way. You're not irresponsible. You're not bad with money. You're simply running emotional software that wasn't designed for price tags. And once you understand that, your entire relationship with spending can start to shift. Because the real question isn't, why do I overspend $20? It's, what is my brain trying to avoid when it hesitates at $200? And that question leads us directly into the deeper psychological wiring behind all of this. Because once you understand how your brain calculates risk, what comes next will surprise you. It's strange, isn't it? how your brain, this incredibly advanced machine capable of solving complex problems, can completely miscalculate something as simple as a purchase. But here's the quiet truth most people never hear. Your brain was never designed for money. It was designed for survival. And the moment you understand that, almost every irrational spending habit suddenly makes perfect sense. Let me explain. For more than 99% of human history, your ancestors weren't comparing prices or deciding between the 32-inch or 55-inch TV. They were making resource decisions measured in minutes of energy, not dollars. Small resource decisions, low risk, low consequence, like picking one fruit instead of another. Large resource decisions, potentially dangerous, choosing the wrong hunting path, building shelter in the wrong place, risking the tribe's limited supplies. So the brain evolved what psychologists call a threat detection heuristic, a simple rule: bigger choices equals bigger potential danger. Fast forward to today, and that ancient wiring hasn't updated. Your emotional brain still thinks a $200 spending decision is life-altering, even though logically you know it isn't. Here's the thing. This is where loss aversion quietly runs the show. Research shows people feel the pain of losing $200 almost twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of gaining it. So, when you hesitate to spend a larger amount, your brain is actually trying to protect you from emotional pain, not financial loss. Think about that for a moment. Your hesitation isn't fear of spending money. It's fear of being wrong. It's fear of regret. It's fear of the version of yourself who might look back and say, "Why did you do that?" And that fear, that ancient survival instinct, is so strong that you'll often avoid the $200 purchase altogether, even if it would improve your life. Meanwhile, the $20 purchase, your brain classifies that as harmless, a non-event, something that doesn't require threat detection or risk analysis. No danger equals no hesitation. This is also why mental accounting plays such a huge role. Your brain doesn't see $20 spent 10 times as the same thing as one $200 decision. It categorizes them emotionally, not mathematically. 10 $20 decisions feel like 10 tiny sips of water. One $200 decision feels like dumping the whole jug. But both outcomes leave you equally thirsty. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Because this ancient math problem isn't just about fear, it's about energy conservation. Every big decision requires what psychologists call cognitive load. Your brain has to simulate the future, weigh outcomes, evaluate risk, estimate benefit, and align it with your identity. That's exhausting. So, the emotional brain looks for shortcuts. Let's avoid the big decision and soothe ourselves with small pleasures instead. This is why you can buy a $20 accessory without thinking, but researching a $200 purchase drains you before you even start. It's not laziness. It's your brain trying to conserve energy by avoiding complexity. And if you've ever wondered why you procrastinate big purchases, why you plan to think about it later, or why you default to small impulse buys, this is the root. It's not money behavior. It's survival behavior. Picture it like this. Your brain is still running ancient software on modern hardware. It's trying to process 2025 problems with 20,000-year-old instincts, and that mismatch creates chaos. You're living in a world where large purchases are often the ones that create growth, yet your brain still treats them as threats. At the same time, the tiny indulgences, the ones your brain thinks are harmless, quietly drain your wealth. It's a psychological paradox. But once you understand the formula your mind uses, you can finally see the real problem. You don't overspend because you're undisciplined. You overspend because your brain is trying to protect you. And that brings us to the emotional engine behind this entire pattern, the invisible chemistry that makes small purchases irresistible and big purchases overwhelming. There's a moment right before you buy something small where your brain lights up just a little. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's powerful. It's that tiny rush you feel when you grab a coffee you didn't plan for, or toss a $20 item into your cart, or hit buy now on something that promises a few seconds of comfort. And the truth is, this moment has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with chemistry. You see, your brain has a reward messenger, dopamine, and dopamine loves small, fast, low effort rewards. A $20 purchase is the perfect storm. Quick, easy, low risk. Your brain gets a hit of pleasure before your logical mind even wakes up. Here's the thing. Small purchases act like emotional band-aids. They soothe boredom. They distract from stress. They create a sense of momentary control when life feels chaotic. If you've ever said, "It's only $20, what you really meant was, "It's only one tiny moment of feeling better." Think about that for a second. Your emotional brain isn't trying to sabotage your finances, it's trying to regulate your feelings. But big purchases, that's where the chemistry flips. A $200 decision doesn't offer dopamine, it demands responsibility. It demands self-reflection. It demands commitment. And dopamine hates commitment. Bigger purchases activate a completely different system. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, evaluating, delaying gratification, which means the emotional reward is delayed and potentially uncertain. And your brain, wired for speed and survival, hates uncertainty. This is why buying something small feels good immediately, but deciding on something important feels mentally heavy. One feels like relief, the other feels like pressure. In one consumer science study, people were 3 times more likely to buy a small, impulsive item when stressed, but their willingness to make a larger planned purchase actually decreased under the same stress. It's not that they couldn't afford the bigger purchase, it's that stress amplifies avoidance. See the pattern? Small purchases equals emotional relief. Big purchases equals emotional exposure. And here's the part most people never realize. When you hesitate on a meaningful purchase, the gym membership, the course, the repair, the upgrade that would genuinely help your life, it's not because you don't want it, it's because buying it forces you to confront a deeper question. Am I ready to change? And that's a heavy question. Heavier than $200. Heavier than the object itself. So your brain does what it always does when faced with emotional weight. It escapes into something small, pleasurable, and easy. It's like choosing a tiny sugar rush instead of a real meal. One distracts you. The other nourishes you. But distraction is always easier. Imagine standing at a crossroads. One path is a smooth downhill slope, the $20 impulse. The other is a steep staircase, the $200 investment. Not because of the price, but because of what the price represents emotionally. And this is the heart of the pattern. You're not avoiding the cost. You're avoiding the discomfort. The discomfort of choosing. The discomfort of committing. The discomfort of stepping into a better version of yourself. Small purchases let you feel something now. Big purchases ask you to become someone later. And that tension between who you are in the moment and who you could be is the psychological battlefield where most people quietly lose money, confidence, and momentum. But once you understand this emotional chemistry, everything begins to shift. Because the real problem isn't the dopamine hit. It's what happens when dopamine becomes your decision maker. And that brings us to a deeper cost, the cost of avoiding the very purchases that move your life forward. There's a quiet moment, usually the day after you've avoided a big purchase, where you feel it, that tiny sting of regret. Not the loud, dramatic regret of spending too much, but the subtle ache of knowing you put something important off again. It's the kind of feeling that whispers instead of shouts. And here's the thing. Avoiding a $200 decision doesn't feel like losing money. It feels like staying safe. But that safety comes with a hidden cost most people never see. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine you've been needing to fix your car brakes. You've known for weeks, maybe months. Every time you drive, you hear that little grinding sound, the one you pretend isn't getting worse. The cost? $200. But because that purchase feels heavy, stressful, uncertain, you avoid it. Instead, over the next month, you buy a $12 snack, a $19 candle, a $25 impulse accessory, a $15 takeout meal. Each one feels tiny. Each one feels allowed. But the total quietly surpasses what the repair would have cost you. Meanwhile, the breaks get worse. And this is the part that hits hard. Avoidance turns small problems into expensive ones. What could have been a $200 repair becomes a $600 one. What could have been a simple decision becomes a stressful emergency. What could have improved your life ends up draining it. This is the psychological penalty of hesitation. And it doesn't just happen with car repairs. It happens when you delay buying better tools for your work, when you avoid investing in your health, when you postpone a course or skill that could raise your future income, when you hold back on purchases that make your environment calmer, your routine easier, your life smoother. Avoiding meaningful spending is like building a house on a cracked foundation. The cracks don't show at first, but over time, everything else starts leaning, weakening, sagging until the structure no longer supports you. Here's something researchers found. People who avoid big financial decisions due to stress spend 28% more in emergency costs later. Not because emergencies happen more often, but because the small problems they ignored eventually became crises. It's the emotional equivalent of ignoring the check engine light. The light doesn't go away. It just gets louder. There's also an identity cost. Every time you avoid a meaningful decision, you reinforce a quiet belief. I'm not ready. I'm not capable. I don't trust myself to make the right choice. And that belief slowly shapes your relationship with money and with yourself. Avoiding big purchases doesn't just delay progress, it delays your evolution. It keeps you living in the same patterns, the same limitations, the same emotional loops you've been trying to outgrow. But here's the hopeful part. This isn't a flaw. It's a protective instinct that simply hasn't been updated. Once you understand it, you can shift it. Because the real issue isn't the $200. It's the psychological weight attached to it, the sense of responsibility, identity, and potential regret. And once you rewrite that internal story, everything changes. Which brings us to the next chapter, the emotional heart of this entire pattern. Because before you can spend differently, you have to understand the story you've been living under. There's a moment, usually quiet, usually private, when you begin to realize something. Your spending habits aren't just behaviors. They're stories. Stories you learned long before you ever earned your first dollar. And if you listen closely, you can hear the echo of those stories every time you hesitate on a meaningful purchase or rush into an impulsive one. Here's the thing, most people never consider. We don't spend money based on logic. We spend based on identity, and identity is shaped by childhood. Maybe you grew up in a home where money meant stress, where every big purchase turned into an argument, and where "we can't afford that" became a sentence that carved itself into your nervous system. So now, as an adult, big purchases trigger the same emotional alarm bells. Not because you can't afford them, but because somewhere inside, a younger version of you still believes danger is attached to spending. Or maybe you were raised in a family where small treats were the only safe form of joy, where tiny purchases were the only way to feel good without guilt. And now that pattern follows you like a shadow. You chase the little highs and avoid the big decisions that would genuinely improve your life. Think about that for a moment. Your current spending habits may actually be a coping mechanism, a way your younger self learned to feel secure, valued, or comforted. And that's why you overspend $20, but freeze at $200. One is familiar. One is emotionally loaded. This is the point in the story where people often feel shame, but shame is never the answer, because nothing about this is your fault. You learned what you learned to survive, to feel safe, to feel in control, but surviving and thriving require different scripts. And right now, you're outgrowing your old one. Here's the hopeful part. Once you recognize the story you've been following, you get to decide whether to keep it or rewrite it. You get to say, I'm allowed to make meaningful investments in myself. I'm allowed to choose long-term value over short-term relief. My past relationship with money doesn't have to become my future. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is make the purchase that scares you, not because of the thing itself, but because of who you become by choosing it. This is the emotional climax of your journey, the moment you stop seeing money as a threat and start seeing it as a tool. The moment you realize avoiding big decisions was never about the amount, but about the version of yourself you didn't think you were ready to step into. And once that shifts, even a little, the way you spend, think, choose, and grow begins to transform. Because the story you tell yourself about money is ultimately the story you tell yourself about who you are. And now that the story is changing, it's time to learn how to make decisions from that new identity. Take a breath for a moment, because everything you've learned so far, the instincts, the chemistry, the stories, the patterns, all lead to this point. The point where spending stops being emotional chaos and starts becoming conscious choice. Here's the thing. You don't need a complicated budgeting system to change your relationship with money. You need a new framework, one rooted in clarity, intention, and identity. And it starts with a simple question. Does this purchase move me toward the person I'm becoming or keep me stuck in the person I've been? When you approach money through identity, something powerful happens. The emotional weight shifts. Because now spending isn't about price, it's about alignment. A $20 impulse buy suddenly becomes more visible. You can see why you're reaching for it. You can feel the emotional itch behind it. You can decide consciously whether it's actually serving you. And the $200 decision, it becomes less intimidating because you're no longer viewing it as a threat. You're viewing it as a step forward. Here's the framework I want you to try: simple, calm, and honest. 1. Ask, is this soothing or supporting? Small purchases usually soothe. Meaningful purchases usually support. Neither is wrong, but knowing the difference changes everything. 2. Ask, will this matter in a week, a month, a year? Most $20 purchases evaporate. Many $200 decisions compound. 3. Ask, what emotion is driving this? If it's stress, boredom, or avoidance, pause. If it's growth, clarity, or alignment, proceed with intention. 4. Ask, who am I becoming through this choice? Because every purchase, big or small, is a vote for your future identity. This framework isn't about restriction, it's about awareness. It's about shifting from reaction to intention, from impulse to clarity, from survival to growth. And maybe the most important part, you get to choose again and again. There's no perfection here, only progress. So, the next time you feel yourself reaching for something small and unnecessary, or hesitating on something meaningful and beneficial, pause. Take a breath. Remember who you're becoming, because you're no longer just spending money. You're building a life. You're rewriting your story. You're choosing alignment over autopilot, and you're finally stepping into a relationship with money that feels calm, conscious, and yours. Which part of this journey feels like yours?